Transnistria, who is seeing its fuel from Russia cut off, is rejecting an offer to buy gas from Europe to replace its Russian energy sales. They expect Russia to actually resume supplies to Moldova as the country faces an energy crisis. Let me read some of this quickly. The Russian-occupied Transnistria region of Moldova has rejected the Moldovan capital's offer to help the region purchase gas via European platforms. Transnistria instead expects Russia's Gazprom will resume deliveries of natural gas. Russia's state-controlled energy giant Gazprom halted gas deliveries to Moldova on January 1st, citing alleged unpaid debt by the Moldovan government. The Moldovan government energy company, Moldova Gas. Now, most experts, it's like the number's over $700 million. Most experts say it's probably bullshit, and it's the Russian government making up numbers, and that the actual amount of money is probably half that total. The suspension triggered an energy crisis in Transnistria, which now faces industrial collapse due to widespread power outages. Authorities in Transnistria do not want to purchase gas from the West, claiming this would involve higher and unsustainable energy prices. Moldova had previously offered to assist Transnistria in securing energy resources via the European platforms to mitigate the crisis. Transnistrian officials rejected the offer and said they believe Gazprom will resume Russian gas supplies. Russian troops have occupied Transnistria during the early 1990s. Look, maybe the Russian government will resume gas supplies to Transnistria, but I mean, there's a chance that they just don't, and that they're trying their best right now to increase pressure on Europe in the event that negotiations actually come around, come January, come February. They're trying to break the will of Europe to fight, and there's not many levers left that Russia has to pull on. And one of the few diplomatic and economic levers they have to pull on is the little bit of fuel that they're still exporting to Europe, to, governments like Moldova. To countries like Moldova. So, there is a possibility they don't. But then on the other hand, if the Transnistrian government goes under and they have to either go on Western gas, go on the Western hooch, and go on that evil black nectar from the West, then the Russians are going to be losing influence because it'll be the West that's providing them energy, even if it's going to be at a higher cost and a higher transit cost, because if you transit, for example, liquefied natural gas, not through a pipeline, but you have to transport it over across the Atlantic or through Qatar or wherever. Well, yeah, it's obviously going to cost more, just for transit costs, period. But on the other hand, if they decide not to take that deal and they don't get the resumption of gas supplies, well, they don't want to just collapse. And if the Russians see Transnistria go under, what message would be? Oh my God, could you imagine? Bashar al-Assad goes under before the new year, and within months into the new year, then Transnistria, another territory that Russia is illegally occupying currently, goes under. God, could you imagine how terrified the Georgian oligarch king would be in Tbilisi? Oh my God. Even Lukashenko and Kadyrov would be sweating a bit. So I don't think that the Russians are going to leave Transnistria to dry, even if Gazprom is continuing to report losses. But we'll see. Russia can only do what it can afford to do. I wanted to talk about the Moldovans who are dealing with really, really bad energy crises right now due to a cutoff of Russian gas. So Transnistria is a pro-Russian region in Moldova that the Russians intervened in the early 1990s to protect, in their language, the Russian speakers of the area, and their tank corps beat back the Moldovan armed forces, and they've been illegally stationed in Moldova ever since, guarding this breakaway state. Still flies a Soviet flag. It is now the capital of drug smuggling in Europe. It's held back a lot of development for Transnistria, but there are a decent amount of Russian speakers there that do have some loyalty to Russia. But Russia intervened, leaned on the power there, and now has military base between Moldova and Ukraine. And so when Russia started having all of its gas cut off into Europe, one of the areas that was still receiving the gas was Moldova. It gets a significant amount of its gas from Russia. But recently, Russia cut off that gas basically in its entirety. And it also meant cutting it off for Transnistria as well. Now, the Transnistrian authorities, the little breakaway state government, they said, don't worry, eventually the Russians, they'll turn it back on and we'll be okay. But the Moldovan government was like, no, we'll offer you Western gas. We want to give you gas to protect you during this crisis. But that was rejected by the transition authorities. They said that they'll simply receive the gas once the Russians turn it back on. But it has not been turned back on. Every time planned electrical outages are imposed on this village in southern Moldova, 73-year-old retiree Vasily Donik passes the time solving crossword puzzles in a room he illuminates with a small gas lamp. It's a bit hard without electricity, said the former deputy school director, who has stocked firewood to ensure he can use his wood-burning stove in the room he shares with his wife to stay warm. There's still gas, but it will end soon. The village of Kapanka is situated just several kilometers across the de facto border from Moldova's separatist pro-Russian Transnistria region, where hundreds of thousands of people have been left without heating and hot water after Russia halted gas supplies to the region on January 1st over an alleged $709 million debt for past supplies in Moldova. Now, this debt that Russia's talking about, the $709 million debt that Moldova needs to pay, this is a made-up number. Now, that's not to say that Moldova doesn't have any debt to Russia, but experts project that the actual number is probably more than half of this, and this is a bit of strong-arming tactics because Sandu, the leader that was just recently reelected, very pro-EU, and recently Moldova had that referendum where it just barely voted that it wanted to go forward with joining the European Union. And during both races, both for the race for the government and during that referendum, there were big, widespread claims of Russian election interference in Moldovan politics, essentially vote buying, large vote buying. But it was unable to tilt the scale in either case. And so there's been a lot of tension recently, and so one could see this as attached to that tension. The decision by Russia's state-owned energy giant Gazprom, which came into effect a day after a gas transit agreement between Russia and Ukraine expired, halted gas supplies to Transnistria's gas-operated power plant, the country's largest, which provided a significant portion of Moldova's electricity. Kapanka, the power plant, like over a dozen other, not the power plant, sorry, the village, towns or villages administered by the Moldovan authorities in the capital, situated close to Transnistria, remains interconnected to the separatist region's Soviet-era energy infrastructure, leaving them vulnerable amid the energy crisis. Planned daily electrical outages throughout Transnistria, which includes the village, are currently scheduled for 4 hours twice a day. While the power plant transitioned to coal and has led to some unexpected outages, some residual gas remained in the pipes. It's hard to get by with the electricity and the gas shortages. Yesterday, we were without power for 8 hours. Everyone is scratching their heads, figuring out what to do so they don't freeze. Citing findings by British and Norwegian audit firms, Moldovan pro-Western government claims its debt stands close to $8.6 million and has accused Moscow of weaponizing energy to destabilize the European Union candidate country. To be clear, that means the discrepancy is by a factor of, one second. If we're talking about 8.6 million to a comparison of, 709? We're talking about like a difference of like a factor of like 200 or like 3, like a massive factor. Like nearly a factor of nearly like 100 or something. It's crazy. It's a gigantic lie, a massive lie. It is just used as an excuse to try to freeze out the population and add pressure. Moldova Prime Minister Dorin Risen this week accused Russia of artificially creating an energy crisis to cause instability and to influence the results of the parliamentary elections that Moldova will hold in 2025. What they want to achieve is to have a pro-Russian government in Moldova that would ultimately allow for the consolidation of military capacity of Russia in the Transnistrian region, and correspondingly to use this leverage over Ukraine. Transnistria, which broke away, we already know all this. We already know the history of Transnistria. Last month, Moldova's parliament also voted to impose a state of emergency in the energy sector, as the crisis threatened to leave the former Soviet Republic without sufficient energy this winter, and fears that the situation could trigger a humanitarian crisis in Transnistria, where temperatures often drop to sub-zero degrees Celsius. The looming crisis also prompted the Moldovan capital to implement a series of energy-saving measures beginning January 1st, which include reducing lighting in public and commercial buildings by at least 30% and energy-intensive business operating during off-peak hours. Moldova's state energy company has increased electricity purchases from neighboring Romania to ensure capacity, but it's also more costly. Although a mild January is helping matters, energy prices have increased, and the government has said it will help to offset the bills. I just wanted to get it across the situation that's going on over there. We don't need to read the rest of the article, but you get the point. This is a good AP article. It really gives a lot of information about it. Most of them are very surface level. Thank you, Associated Press, as usual. Forgive my stupidity, but why is Ukraine cutting off gas now? Well, no, this is not Ukraine. This is Russia. What's going on in Moldova is Moldova recently had an election where they re-elected a president that's pro-EU and pro-Ukraine. And they had a referendum that came out pro-EU after widespread allegations of Russian interference trying to pull it in the other way. And now they're going to have parliamentary elections in 2025, after we have clear signs that the Russians tried to interfere in the past elections. So, how do you try to pressure the country to go in a certain way? And how would you respond to a country that is clearly indicating that its population is willing to go the other way, but it was close? It was a close election, but your interference didn't get it over the top. Well, it continue the interference and add an economic pressure going into those parliamentary elections to try push it more in your direction. Now, could this have a backblast effect and a knockback effect of people like, wow, the Russians are trying to freeze us out. We really need to shift and go to the Europeans soon. But in Transnistria, it's not going to work. It's not going to work if they're not able to get the European gas in. And but the point is that it's a type of pressure going into the parliamentary elections, and it's a type of pressure in response to the lack of decision of the people to go back to the Ruski Mir instead of further integrating themselves with the European Union. And the mechanism by which they've chosen to add this pressure is they've lied. They've lied about the amount of debt that the Moldovans are in to the Russians in order to justify cutting off gas, even though Moldova is one of the few countries that is continuing to consume Russian energy exports in high amounts in Europe. In fact, it's one of the highest Russian energy consumers as a percentage of its total import of any country left in Europe outside of, like, the Hungarians. Maybe the Slovaks. So the Ukraine cutting off gas is a different story. That has to do with the Slovaks and the Hungarians. I hope that these very interesting gas politics kept the viewers enthralled.